it's her presence that she brings as the sort of authoring tool. And so I get to this story about her as the first global Black woman film star through primary source research. I looked in the Black press and studied how journalists were talking about her before she goes to Paris, and also how they talk about her films once they come back to the US, and of course, the time that she spends there. I extracted material from her various biographies, including her own autobiographies and her interviews, and just kind of drew them together. But a major tool as I finished the book, this time last year, I was working on the copy edits for the book, as some of my friends here will know. I was texting them, I can't do it. But here we are. Thank you for your assistance in encouraging text and getting here. But it really meant a lot to me as to have my own experience as a working professional woman, as a Black woman navigating the world, as a tool for understanding her moves, you know what I'm saying? And kind of learning to respect the ways that she navigated the various kinds of expectations that were placed upon her. Like, how did she get to this 50-year career? I thought about her in relationship to a number of other women who were not able to enjoy the longevity that Baker did, and reflected on what is it that allows her to have this 50-year career, and this particular one that she has. On the screen right now would be my left, Nina Mae McKinney, Dorothy Dandridge in the middle, and Ethel Waters, who had a long career, but a different one. She was initially invited to go to Paris, and she declined. And Baker went in her stead. So the book ends up being the cinematic Josephine Baker ends up being this way of reflecting on the interaction between Baker's characters on screen, her off-screen persona, her stage performances, how she presents herself in newspapers. I wanted to be able to think through her multiplicity. And so I think I should definitely say that one thing about this book is that it's not a biography. Rather than studying the life of Josephine Baker, I'm looking at her screen work. I'm looking at the figure of Baker. I focus on a very tiny part of her career. She, as I said, she had a 50-year career. She's born in 1906 in St. Louis, so right here in the Midwest, and then travels on the vaudeville circuit in the teens and early 20s before going to Paris in 1926, where she performs at a couple of different theaters before landing at the Folies Bergère, where she does her famous banana dance, and then takes that starring role in Siren of the Tropics, launching the film career that I focus on in the film. But of course, her life goes on past that. She performs internationally on the stage, and also enters political life. She uses her entertainment platform to help desegregate venues in the US. So the 50s and early 60s, and she even ends up being named the NAACP names I think it's May 20th, it's Josephine Baker Day, in honor of her work in that area. So so this is the book that, in my mind, just helps me to understand how movies work, how Black women on film work, like what are the rhetorics of their presentation, their performance, the interaction of music and dialogue, songs within a narrative, kind of all of that. But ultimately, I kind of committed very early on to thinking about Baker more as a subject than an object, and then letting her work tell me what needed to be said about it by being just very open and very sensitive to her narratives rather than, you know, the other way around. So that's basically The Cinematic Josephine Baker, a book about, I motivated by my connection to her humanity, but ultimately a film criticism, a series of close analyses, just kind of diving into the surface of her image.
Thank you, Terry. Chris, are you ready?
Yes, hello, and thank you for inviting me. Yeah, my connection to Josephine Baker actually goes back to the 1960s when I was a teenager and my parents had moved to Germany, and I actually saw Josephine Baker on television probably at least 2 or 3 times, because she was on TV back then quite often, especially German television, and usually in variety shows on Saturday night. And frankly, I have to tell you, I was a male teenager, so my impression was it was this grandma who was in these extravagant outfits singing the kind of music that I really didn't like. but that was really my first impression. But I got to a completely different relationship when I joined Eastman, now George Eastman Museum, back then the George Eastman House, in 1984 as an associate curator. I had done an internship at Eastman House in the mid-70s and then returned after getting my PhD. And that was a time when, especially in the American archival world, through the efforts of the National Endowment for the Arts, there was a push to really start recuperating and preserving images of African Americans on film, both African American films, race films, as well as other films. And so, you know, I went to the archive and started looking, and then we found that through James Card, who had been the founder of the collection at Eastman and had collected a significant number of Baker's films, including both Princess Tam Tam and Zuzu, which were 35 millimeter nitrate prints, original nitrate prints, which we then copied, made new negatives, and then made new prints from, and a 16 millimeter print of Siren of the Tropics. We didn't really do much with that at the time. And in the meantime, of course, as Terry, you know, better material was found in France in 35 millimeter. But we also had 2 shorts. One is, of course, from 1930, the Folies Bergère clips that you reference in your book. And then also the 1926 clip, which was initially in our inventory at Eastman House under the title The Plantation. And of course, it was as you talk about, Terry, the banana dance and that little narrative there. That was listed under that title, and that was also not 35 millimeter nitrate film, was just a clip, and so we preserved that. And so in the mid to late 1980s, I actually traveled quite extensively showing these films around. I was at the Walter Art Center in Minneapolis, Art Institute in Chicago. When we premiered the films in New York in October of 1988, there was such a rush for tickets that there was a traffic jam in front of Film Forum, closing down traffic in downtown New York. And that's when I also met Jean-Claude Becker, who we then had an after party that night at chez Josephine, and we kind of became friends. I saw him at least 3 or 4 more times every time I go down to New York. And of course, chez Josephine, his nightclub, which was on 42nd Street and I think between 10th and 11th, or between 9th and 10th, I can't remember, was kind of an after theater club for supper club for when people came out of the theater, but it was wonderfully decorated, and he was, of course, a gracious host. So that, you know, my dealings with Josephine were not as subject, more as object, but as archival object, and making sure that these films got preserved and really got out into the community, because I felt that was what our role was as an archivist, to make sure these films got out. And then the last thing we did is then we made an agreement with Kino, and then the first came out on VHS in both Princess Tam Tam and Zuzu were put out on VHS, and of course Kino since then has put them out on DVD, and they're out other places now too. So that's all I have to say right now. But I have questions about your book, which I really love, Terry. So.
Oh, thank you. You did well when you mentioned Chez Josephine. You bring back some memories of my own kind of communing with her spirit by going to Chez Josephine. And I think one of her favorite meals was spaghetti bolognese. I've never actually said that word out loud. Is that what, am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
It was quite successful. It was very convincing. Thank you.
It's so good. I made it once the book came out. I had a whole week of it here at home, but I would go to that restaurant and order her meal and have it with a glass of wine and just like have my Josephine Baker thoughts. So
it was that after party dinner after Film Forum, the two Nicholas brothers were also there, Harold and no, I forget the other one's name, but
I don't know.
You know who I mean.
Jonas, Nicholas, but yeah, anyway.
So Terry, you know, I really appreciated I mean, just the generousness with which you identified the way that you came about doing this work. I'm really struck by your attention to actually thinking about Josephine Baker as a subject. You know, I think we live in a time where, you know, there's a lot of Black film and media criticism out there in the world today, where people are more driven by their tool and couldn't really give a damn about their object. So it meant a great deal for me to read work where someone was genuinely trying to listen. And could you talk a little bit more about the prologue? I mean, I was struck by the ways that you kind of identified the ways that Josephine Baker navigated a lot of scripts that had been made available to her. Many scripts that she did not care for, but still the ways that you understood how those scripts, the kind of extra diegetic resonance of those scripts for you yourself as a Black woman in the Academy, and in terms of your identification with Josephine Baker. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It took a while. Like, I think in the beginning, I really thought, like, you know, you're supposed to be objective, and, you know, I was like trying to be an historian. So like, I'm going to be an historian of Josephine Baker. So I was really trying to have her at a distance. But at a certain point, I realized that we were navigating very similar terrain. And actually, she was teaching me how to navigate the terrain that I was on, that there are different kinds of performances, I guess, that are required to, you know, to work through institutions, and that she was providing something of a model there. But I do remember at one point, I could just come back from a research trip to Paris, and I found that I realized that if I kept framing her only in her France moment and with the papers that were there, I would kind of be stuck looking at her through just through exoticizing primitivist, crazy white people, like, you know, who are just sort of like, oh my God, what is she doing? And the Blackness, and which is, I mean, Blackness is awesome. I'm always here to hear that celebration, but it struck me that she wasn't being looked at by her peers, And so by switching the context to the US, and by looking at her through, like with Black journalists, I was looking at her along with other creative intellectual types who were invested in the idea of a Black film, who had seen lots of Black performers. And so they were able to, I think, have a much more nuanced, as one says, nuanced reading of her. And that's where I started to learn what Josephine Baker was all about. The types of movements she made, her investment in comedy, and that's where I thought it was. I was like, oh my god! So her authorship is actually based in comedy, and in creating these movements, which then get reframed when she goes to Paris. So then I just started to see her whole story differently once I started looking at her through the Black press.
Yeah, that's great. Chris?
Yeah, I was fascinated the way you were able to draw on previous colonialist tropes, especially your discussion of Bartman. And I'm wondering how you came to choose her, because I'm sure there were number of examples of that kind of thing. I mean, there is certainly a long tradition of, European colonization of Africa and bringing back trophies of one kind or another. And I mean, we even know that, the first Englishmen brought back Native Americans to the UK. So what was it about Bartman's story that so fascinated you?
Yeah, I learned about Bartman through a poem called the Venus Hottentot by Elizabeth Alexander. It's a persona poem in which Bartman talks about her time performing. And there's a point in the poem where she refers to her imaginary daughters in banana skirts. And says that line just always stuck in my mind, that Bartman is looking forward to her progeny, and that Baker is embodying that. So that that cemented the two of them together in my mind. Yeah.
There's a passage in your book, and it speaks to this kind of Bartman and Baker, a really stunning kind of dialogue. It's a tricky dialogue because in terms of the kind of perceptions and conclusions that people draw about each of them, right? And so you write, Bartman provides the shadow to Baker, framing and underlying her performances, shaping what they projected to her audiences, perhaps unbeknownst to her. Right? And I really adore the way that you put these two, and this thinking about a continuum in that way. And it kind of makes me wonder about, there's a great book by Daryl Pinckney called Out There, Mavericks of African American Literature. And it's a small book, and in the book it's based on it looks at four figures who have essentially fallen out of favor with the politics of their moment, have fallen out of the canon of African American literature, right? And so he does this really incredible work of talking about why they were important in their moment and why they were lost. And I was thinking a lot about that throughout the entire book, about the ways that even the people's perceptions of Josephine Baker informing what might be their kind of archival motivation. And I just kind of adore the ways that you put all of that kind of, in many ways, what we would call today a kind of respectability politics on pause to actually kind of address Baker. But I'd love to hear a bit about your own kind of navigation of the archive and the kind of perceptions that the archive has established about Baker.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I read about her was in a really great book, The Third Eye, Fatima Tobing-Roney's book. And I want to say that Baker is in the coda of that book. I don't think it's a full chapter. There were a number of these books that had Baker kind of on the side, you know, the coda, the footnote, or just as an image in the intro, but then they went on to do their real study. And in that book, in the Third Eye, and I'm remembering myself in Paris, like this book has just come out. I guess I'd gone to like the English bookstore to get it. I heard about it, went and got it. And because I didn't know anything about film, you see, and I was trying to learn about movies and how you study movies. So I was, you know, being very on point. And so I get this book, and she's saying, you know, Baker was known. She's not making this assessment, but she's quoting other people or summarizing other people as saying that Baker was a toady to whites, a kind of minstrel character. And then I went on to read another book about like 19th century images, Black women images in French literature, and that Baker emerges as this kind of bad object, that she was successful, but she was trapped in her own image. And she did seem to be a kind of a bad object, like a failed object, especially the bananas part. Later, there's another great book about her, Josephine Baker, Icon and Image, which focuses more on Baker of the 50s and 60s. And the preface of that book explicitly says, you know, that we need to get beyond her bananas. But I thought, but I like the bananas. It's fun and it's interesting. And I want to know what's going on there. You know, I was about her age there, you know what I mean? You're kind of like, what is wrong with this? Like, can we not have joy and nice things and beauty and ambition and glamour? And like, why? I mean, or the other thing was that she has a secret message, that there is something that's like, and sometimes the image of her as a spy would kind of be leveraged to in a way apologize for this banana dancing. So then it's like, oh, see, she's manipulating the stereotype. And like I said, as I just got older, I just realized, you know, sometimes you're manipulating it. Sometimes you don't realize it's happening. Sometimes you're like, you know what, I'm down for it. And I just, over time, I came to appreciate that complexity. But I also wanted to not write about, I didn't want to write about writing about her. That's what drove me to the Black press. I was like, I want to know what she did and who looked at her here at home, her own folks, and just start there. I wanted to feel grounded and like I was doing something real. And even with the Bartman work, I don't know. I think this was like 2000, I don't know when it was. This took so long, I don't know when anything happened, but at a certain point, like when these newspapers started coming online, that's what made it possible for me to take this breath. And I remember getting the London Times, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can just read the transcript of Sarah Bartman's like trial. What? Okay. What is that like? And then I really felt like I was bearing witness to the condition of her body. I was really drawn to the descriptions of her coughing, whether she was cold, whether she was hot. So like I had on the one hand, Professor Alexander's wonderful poem about the Venus Hottentot. And then on the other hand, I was getting educated on what her physical life was like. And so then I think throughout, I just wanted to be very caring with these women who had worked so hard, and were the first of their name. And, you know, I don't know if a lot of you all saw the Tina Turner documentary. I mean, women be working hard out there. And I think sometimes you just have to just bear witness to that and look at their work Just look at their work and name that. And you know, these people who are just like, oh, we haven't seen her before. What is this? Is it a man? Is it a woman? You know, come on now. You know, there's a, I mean,
Yeah.
I could get into that, but I just wanted to get really specific so I could appreciate her.
Yeah.
And that others could too, because that's her humanity, her creativity, her vision, her ideas. Even watching the Tina Turner documentary, I was struck when one of her managers says, you know, something like you know, I was helping her with her vision. I was like, ah, yeah. Recognizing that as a performer, she's not just a prop, but she's thinking, she wants to do something and is doing something. So it's important to witness that.
Chris?
Yeah, one of the real epiphanies I had reading your book was toward the end, you bring up a subject you've talked about throughout the book, and that is this narrative of heterosexual romance that she is denied.
Right.
That the objects of her desire are white males, and that in whether Siren of the Tropics or Zuzu or Princess Tam Tam, there's a connection, but it is unrequited love. And what really struck me was that your discussion near the end of the book, where you talk about the gaze and the way the male protagonist with her and the object of his desire in the same frame is always looking away from her as she is talking to him, and this kind of turning her almost invisible in that sense. And that for me was just such a powerful image. And could you just talk about that a little more, about how you got to that point?
Oh, you know, I only saw that when I was working on video essays. Because throughout the writing of the book, I had it in my mind that, okay, yeah, she did, as a plot point, but I didn't see it so much as visual data and as a shot by shot series of actions until I was making learning to make video essays, and I had to select I think it was 10 6-second shots. So that made me, you know, because, you know, when you're writing, you look away to write things down. And this, I couldn't do that. I had to look at everything in front of me and just take things. And so at this point, I thought I was finished with the book. And in a way, I had mentioned these non-love affairs or love non-affairs, but I didn't really get too much into it because I felt that this was one of those moments where either that I didn't feel like I had enough to fully critique the way that her authorship was being undermined. And I wasn't sure like what was the place of that in this overall story. So I mentioned it across a number of chapters, but I didn't really have like the crescendo like cymbal crank, you know, timpanis at the end for it, until I was doing this other kind of visual work. And I could see that, okay, this is what's happening. The way that stardom is created, the female star, it's partly by who's looking at her. One, it's that she is a phenomenon of light, sparkling, the blonde hair, sparkly outfit, all of those things. So like she draws the spectator's eyes, but also someone in the movie needs to be looking at her. And in that movie's in Zuzu, Jean, played by Jean Gabin, is the spotlight of desire. And it just, I didn't see it until I saw it, that he's always looking away from her, and she is just in another movie. So then later when she starts talking about, I found being in the movies cold, I didn't enjoy it. I was like, well, they weren't treating you right, sis. Were not getting the attention that you deserved as the star. The film is built on and banking on her fame. So she's doing her performances, and she thinks, I think in a way, she thinks she's in like a romantic comedy, but she's not getting the romance, and she's the joke instead of just having a cute, delightful movie. And then her performances are like plot points that, like one of them is for bail money. I mean, it's just classic using women's talents. I mean, and it's not even like these guys are worthy of Josephine Baker either. You know what I mean? They're not. There's nothing special about them.
They're boring.
Say that again, Chris.
So they're boring.
They kind of
Very,
to be honest.
very.
But the spec hanging over all of the films is, of course, this specter of miscegenation.
That's right.
Which is
That's
the
right.
hugest taboo in American cinema. And we think of the French as being a little more liberal, but
Right.
not really, are they?
But not really. I think that's right. And I think Elizabeth Ezra talks about like the colonial aesthetic, colonial imagination, and how the other films of the 30s are all about creating a white working class family, and Jean Gabin figures well in those families, but not in this film. And I didn't see anyone say this specifically, but I imagine that they were looking at an American audience for the film too, and were aware of the limitations, in this country.
I just have to tell you that, the opening chapter on the banana dance performance, and the ways that it becomes kind of the grounding foundation of the book in terms of thinking of this prismatic resonance about Josephine Baker through discourses of the imperial and the academic and the pop cultural, I found just really outstanding. As someone who really detests bananas, I hate bananas, but I loved your introduction and your discussion of the textual analysis is so strong. So thank you so much. And I'm really have to congratulate you for, it's quite daring to start with what the image of Josephine Baker that most immediately comes to one's mind, an image of Josephine Baker that people would be more readily to say, well, I know about Josephine Baker, and the way that you kind of fracture that in such a way.
Oh yeah, no, you think you've seen that.
Yeah. I mean, the arc of that across the book is quite incredible. So I'd love for you to speak a bit about my own ignorance about Josephine Baker. I remember being struck being in the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta. And, it's an incredible museum or center devoted to thinking about questions of social justice. And there's a whole section that's devoted to the March on Washington. And then you suddenly round the corner and there's this huge picture of Josephine Baker right there. Yeah, and I was always thinking about, and it's incredible to me that my initial thought was to think of her politicization as a part of the late stage Josephine Baker. But one of the things that I think is incredible about the argument throughout your book is that she is a deeply political figure from beginning to end. Yeah. So could you talk a bit about the kind of misunderstandings? You don't have to speak to my banana hate, but I'd love to hear more about this kind of the ways in which her as an important political figure becomes so quickly lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something about how we see women and how we see nudity, partial nudity, and entertainment, right? That those are areas of vulnerability and risk, which well, maybe not risk. I see it as an area of risk. I think I think she was someone who looked at her options, and her options were domestic work, um or I don't know, like, or domestic work. I mean, those were her options. And she chose entertainment as work that was doable, that was fun, that was clean, and where she could go places, and so what I was struck by these moments where she negotiates her contract. And like, I think when to go to Paris, I don't remember the exact number right now, but let's say they offered her $100. And initially she's like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty good, because a lot of times she wasn't getting paid anything. But then she comes back and she says, wait a minute, are we talking weekly or monthly? What is this? And so there's like the self-possession and advocacy for herself, so that it's because the regular story of her is just her like, oh, Paris grants her this personhood, but she was a person. And what she finds in Paris is a platform that is international. It's like, you make it there and you are everywhere. And she finds a context that sees her, her Charleston and her goofy eyes and just all the little funny stuff that she would do in the US. They see it in a way that is exoticizing, that is a revelation, and that she can capitalize on that and make a career. And she talks about it, like, I think she's in her 60s when she looks back at it, and she's like, I don't know, all of a sudden they were into it. And I think a lot of performers are like that, whether it's Tina Turner or Beyonce, they're like, I don't know, my legs, I have the space. And yes, crazy as it is, I built a career on that. So I think I've actually lost the thread of what you asked me to talk about, but I know that that's one of the things with her, is that shift and positioning her as somebody who is naive and doesn't really know what's going on. But I think this is someone who did know. Now in France, she doesn't speak French when she first gets there. So I think she really didn't know what was going on. I think she just knows performance and dance and comedy, and she's a worker. So she's just working and working it, and benefited from that. And over time, she becomes more discerning. And so with these films, she takes a risk and performs in the film, and then is disappointed. And that disappointment is a mark of her discernment, that she's, why am I just doing the same thing? That's not what I want to do. But she's also not in a position to rewrite this. They wouldn't even translate the script for the first film. So she just didn't really know what was going on. And of course, by the other film, she can speak French and she's doing fine. But she's also changing her image, and she's cultivating her singing, cultivating herself as a kind of an Ethel Waters, like a sort of a glamorous, self-possessed, thinking performer. So, and then I think we have a limited idea maybe of what we think of politics as being, and what we want from, what we want someone to do in terms of an activism.
Right.
But her presence, I think, is what she's offering as important, right? Her humanity. Yeah.
Her humanity and her agency.
And her agency.
Yeah. It's not just about the story of Josephine Baker. Here was this goofy girl who happened to be in the right place at the right time.
No, I think she put herself there.
She cultivated that. So
absolutely. Yeah.
It seems to me. Sorry, it seems to me that over her 50-year career, what she does, which is quite unique, is that she becomes a celebrity before that term was actually used, and before social media and all this. She manages to create herself as a celebrity, and film is only one manifestation of that. It continues her nightclub performances, but then even later in the 50s, she's basically only a celebrity then. I mean, she's still performing, but she's performing as a celebrity
Right.
with this
That's a good point.
past, right? But
Yeah.
also with a present as the mother of, 12, maybe 13 adopted children, and her social work and all of these other things, using her celebrity in a very, active way to
Oh,
get what
absolutely.
she wants. And that seems very, especially for someone who's African-American in what was then impossible in this country, is an amazing achievement, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and you think about, Dorothy Jan, like there's just so many other women, Nina Mae McKinney, who were amazing, talented, gorgeous. I mean, so much fire in them, and just to illustrate what she was up against and what she's navigating, whether in France or in the US, and she manages to make something happen. I think sometimes when we look at, she's a real lesson in popular culture and in what it actually is, and the kind of tolerance for imperfection that you need to have, to navigate that, and the tolerance for just like I don't know, I guess words like complication sometimes are alibis for people being terrible. But I think in this case, it just actually is complicated, that she's a living person. We see her over time doing various things. She gets herself to the March on Washington and delivers a wonderful speech that, that the world is behind you. I'm old now, but I'm leaving you to take us the rest of the way, she says. I mean, and she's in her general uniform. This is someone who made herself a spy, on behalf of the resistance, on the behalf of her new country of France. So I mean, there's a power that's just in her that to me is just so undeniable, that I just, what do we want her to do? I mean, she's not the answer, but she's a person in a very complicated time with talent, who's hardworking. But I guess it was also in terms of like this video essay work that I was able to hear her talk about her career, like when she's older and she's talking about her young days, and just her calm and her warmth, and just her own, just sort of like, yeah, that was crazy times. I wore this banana skirt. And then you just kind of see like, it just is what it is. It's not her soul. It's bananas. And that those have a history. Like in a way, I don't know, in that chapter, if you feel, I'm just thinking about it now, like that the bananas are kind of demystified in a sense, because I really get into it. Like,
you get into it, but you also make the reader recognize that there's also a dynamic of projection that's
yeah.
at play, and I think that's what makes it so wonderful. We've crossed over into the Q&A line. I do want to say one thing about what you just said, Terry. Another thing to love about the book is that it insists that if you're going to care about Black film and media, that you need to embrace the real power and understanding that there is value in ambivalence and there's value in ambiguity.
Yes.
So thank you so much for that. All right, so we're now breaking the fourth wall. Or is it third wall? Or does Zoom have walls? I'm not sure.
Where are we? Yeah.
So should we just call on anyone with a hand up? Is that how we should do it?
Yeah, I think that sounds okay.
Okay.
I'll try to have, I don't know, I'm a long answerer, like thinking.
Okay, I'm going into.
How many people?
Okay. In the chat. Okay. All right. I'm looking. in the chat. Okay, here's a question. Terry, could you explain your idea and method and model of the cinematic prism? What does it offer your analysis?
It offers me a way to think about Baker's, like the multitudes of the ambivalence that Michael just mentioned, the ways that she's liberated but also exploited, and to see her image as not just a flat image, but as a complex of images. So when we look at her in the movies, we're supposed to be seeing the Baker from that we read about in the newspaper, the Baker from the stage. That's kind of why she's in the movie is to be the live act, the live Baker. But she's also this character, and it's a character that she feels is representing her own life sort of trajectory, this kind of rags to riches trajectory. So it was a way to think about all of those things, but to always just point out that any one image implies all the other ones. They're partial, as is my understanding, and that it is constantly just like jutting up against other kinds of understandings and images. So that was the cinematic prismatic for me.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got a question now from Justin Foster.
Yeah. Hi. So you talked a little bit earlier about like the Eurocentric like fetishization of the Black image and how people are like, she's so primal, she's so exotic, and how like people a lot of times like project that fetishization of the Black image onto Black actors, and they're like, what was the deeper meaning, like with the bananas, like since she was a spy, like how is she manipulating the industry? So I was wondering your thoughts on how like that expectation of Black actors still exists today. Like you can't just be a Black actor, you have to be a Black actor that's saying something, or a Black actor that has this deeper meaning to your work rather than just being a Black woman who wore a banana skirt.
Yeah, meaning. I mean, there's two words that come to mind, meaning and representation. We have a lot of faith in representation. And I don't know how to tell you this, Justin, and everybody out there, but representation will not save us. A movie is a movie and it can only do so much, mostly just be a movie. So we're in a situation where I think there's stuff that we need socially, politically, and we are wanting, we're doing that work within culture and within popular culture, which is a tough place to get that done. There's so many eyes, there's so many interests. So I just think that this is a habit of reading, a desire for us to be recognized, like Black people, like to find recognition through the image, to feel represented. Then movies are marketed to us as this is for us, but I think we just have to be skeptical. Actually, Michael said it beautifully the other day. I love movies, but I don't trust the shit. And I think that is the theoretical tool that we need to bring to this work, is skepticism, but also respect for the work as work. And as Michael said a minute ago, that patience with ambivalence. There is a lot at stake, but we're not going to solve white supremacy at the movies. Otherwise, I mean, we've been doing this, Birth of a Nation, NAACP campaign, we've been doing this. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Just is that kind of what you were thinking about? That's what you made me think of with your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like the whole representation and how people expect so much of Black actors, and like
It's tough.
White supremacy won't be solved in the movies.
I don't think so. I don't think that's where it's going to happen. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. I mean, I do. Here's my mission, just speaking from my work at the Black Film Center Archive, is that assertion of presence. Like, I want to make sure that we don't think about American film history without Josephine Baker, or without Phil Moore, the uncredited composer, or without, you know, any of the hundreds of thousands of stories that are represented in our collections. I feel like that material life, that documentation of Black creativity, scholarship, has to be there to begin with. So like that I can be 100% passionate about. I have no ambivalence about it. I will go to the ends of the earth to save somebody's papers and make sure that they are in the right conditions so that 100 years from now, you know, the record is there. We were here. You know, I think there's something very magnificent in that. Now, when me sitting in my home, me taking no risks as a performer, me not knowing how the movie got made, looking at other people's work, and no, sir, I'm not going to be judging that. It's just, I think it is complicated and should stay complicated.
Thank you, Terry. I think we've got a question from Kaylin Meadows.
Hi, Terry. I have a question. You talked about this a little bit, but could you elaborate on how creating video essays affects or informs your written work?
Oh, it made me realize my written work was not done. That's one thing. It gave me an entirely other, archive is a little bit of a soft word there, but a whole other body of material to investigate, because I was so fixated on like 20s, 30s. I'm not going to go past this time. And I'm only going to think about Baker's citations, and I just didn't take, I didn't take YouTube seriously enough until I had to rely on it. And so it made me focus on the visual. It expanded the temporal boundaries of my thinking. It made me a lot more emotional in my, I was able to access my feelings about Baker. One of the videos I made is actually about her, one of her co-stars, one of her white women co-stars, and how ambivalent I was about even making a movie about her, because I was like, this is supposed to be about Josephine Baker. I don't want to talk about this lady. But I was dealing with how, just how compelling she was visually, and what the movie was doing to her to make her that way, and how Baker wasn't having that. So it probably brought me into a much more intimate relationship with the material than what I was doing before. And then in rewriting it, like the prologue and stuff, I obviously wrote that last, and I don't think I would have been able to appreciate the might be-ness of the film history that I was writing, like leaving room for that next book on Baker, the postscript on, like the materials that Chris is talking about, and that whole process. There's some films that newsreels I saw of her in Paris that I don't know, all this time later, it was hard to locate them again, especially from this distance, to write about them. So like there's this sense of it gave me some patience and confidence, maybe courage, to let the might be-ness be there in a way that I don't think, and I'm quoting from Saidiya Hartman's her whole idea of histories that might be. Yeah, so that's, yeah. And then it's another way for the book to live on, or the thinking to live on, but it is different. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Terry. I think next is Kaylee Arnold.
Hi, Kaylee.
Hi. I had a question about, so you talk about Josephine Baker with so much care and so much love, but then you talked about how in the beginning of your research, there's all this kind of like other ideas about how she's a bad object. She's kind of a minstrel character. And I was wondering if you came into writing the book and came into your research kind of with this love and this close relationship to Josephine Baker, or if that was something that developed over time and you kind of had to like unlearn the things that you were first reading in your research.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that much about her. There was that poem that I cited, the Venus Hottentot. Again, Professor Alexander had another poem, a persona poem called the Josephine Baker Museum. And I think that might have come out maybe while I was doing my dissertation, because I know for a while the book was called the Josephine Baker Museum, and I was trying to think about Baker as this like multiple series of beings. But no, I didn't really know anything much about her. When I was doing my research in Paris, that project I think was more about writers, and but people that I encountered would mention her to me. And it was the 100th anniversary of the Paris Metro, so there were images of her around, so celebrating 1925. And so she just had, and I was like, well, this is interesting. Okay. So then I just started checking her out, watching the movies. And then I started learning about studying movies. And so those two things kind of worked together. And then I didn't know her well enough to love her. I didn't have any thoughts about her. I was just kind of, my impulse, I guess, was to focus on authorship. I was a literature person. I would never write about somebody's novel as though they didn't write it or didn't care about it. So I suppose I had that disposition. And I also had been taught to value Black women's creativity in whatever form: humming, canning, cooking, quilting, whatever it is. And so I only had to make that more important than what people were accusing her of. And I thought, well, why is that her problem? I mean, but it took a while. Now that it's over, we've been together 20 years. I think now I feel I have a confidence in her and can see in my own work what she taught me. And I feel comfortable kind of.
Thank you for that, Terry. All right, we're running a little cutting things a little close, so I might get a bundle of questions from 3 people, and you can try to do a brief kind of strategic answer or gesture to each of them. So why don't we go from Rachel to Samantha to Grace.
Hi. Well, first I want to say congratulations on your book.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome. And so I guess my question is more about the process of bookmaking and writing a book.
Yeah.
I guess what was your most valued resource that you found or used, or something that really stood out to you? That might be a difficult question to answer, but I'm curious about that. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
You mean like, thank you, ProQuest, for all these digitized newspapers, the historical newspapers. Maybe, I don't know. What do you mean? That's what comes to mind. I mean, in terms of, there are collections that have become available recently. So I think I do feel a little pressure to do a postscript. There's papers at Columbia, the letters at the Houghton Library at Harvard. I think I saw UCLA has something that they recently digitized. But yeah, I think it was really just that ability to go to Newspaper Archive or to ProQuest or whatever and research. Yeah.
Very cool. There's a Samantha.
Yes. Oh, did you want us to jump in or stop? No more.
Or just what? Yeah, go for it.
I'm kind of into it.
Yeah, go for it. Go
Well,
for it.
congratulations on the book. It's very nice to hold. And I really appreciated in the prologue how you noted that you wrote the book like a duet. What a very beautiful sentiment, but also a style. And speaking of thinking about perspectives and you're thinking through the complications of the double and exposure, I'd love you to talk a little bit more about African-American cinephilia, which I think is such a key part of this book, but also as a critical practice that, I'll let Grace also add to the question, and then if you can answer whoever, and I'll come to these talks over and over again until you answer it, so don't worry.
All right, Grace?
Thank you for the book. This is my second webinar that I've watched with an interview of you, so it's always a pleasure to learn from you, Terry. I'm also writing a book about a female performer, a white female performer, but a feminist female performer in France in the 60s and 70s. And I think this is more of a comment than a question, if that's okay. I was so struck by what you've been through, and I've heard you do this twice now, of having to start by saying everything that the book is not. It is not a traditional biography. It is not this, it is not that, and the search for the language to describe your process and what kind of book or study or approach or relationship that we have with our subjects, because it's all these different things, right, all at once. And my compromise, or the way where I've landed for now, is that I say that I'm writing a cultural history of women's filmmaking and media making during the feminist movement in France. That's through the lens of an actress, and the lens of an actress seems to be the most revolutionary part of the whole thing. Because I think film studies is still open to this kind of study that isn't caught up in star studies, right? Which is one of the reasons why acting studies in film studies is one of the last subfields. So just to say that I feel your process. I think that I would love to talk to you at some point, but to say that it's really interesting what we have to go through in order to finally identify what it is we think our projects are. It's not a question, but just really, sort of not trembling. That would be too negative. I'm just excited here in Ohio listening to you talk about.
Thank you. Oh, you're in the Midwest too. Hello, Ohio, just not far from here. No, I thank you for that comment, and it's actually kind of connected to Samantha Shepard's question, in that for part of one thing is that the book is setting out into a different territory than what's there before. Yep. So I think that it's, and I saw a couple of reviews, I do read them, where someone is like, oh, I thought this was going to be a biography. Oh, it reads more like a textbook. I still like it though. And because I think that shift is really important. And I remember making it there in, my apartment in Chicago, be like, oh, okay, so I'm going to write about the figure of Josephine Baker, because it is so easy to slide between her personhood and her persona and not account for that process. And so I want to, even though I'm always saying she and hers and Josephine and me, even that prologue, it is me, but it's also not me. I'm a writer, so I have a writer's persona, and a lot of what I wrote about in the prologue is distant to me now. And so I think those reminders can be important to do. But going back to the cinephilia, this has such an important role in that shift from being looked at to being the looker. And without, the book is just not possible without imagining Black spectatorship, Black cinephilia, and the specific values that these writers had when they looked at her films and her performances. Because if I rely on, let's call it the mainstream press, then she's kind of absent until she's returning and doing something in service of the country. If I rely on the French press, then I'm I'm just kind of circulating in the same, I don't know, I'm just circulating in the same set of tropes that have a distance from her and that are all about her, I guess, like her service as an entertainer there, or her, what people are projecting onto that. Is there wasn't a language of her feminism. She wasn't connected to any particular movement. She wasn't, so she says mixed things about what her intentions are and what she wants. And so she, you know, she's kind of an unreliable narrator in that way, you know what I mean? But by bringing it to the Black press and seeing what they say a movie should be. First, the excitement and why they're excited, then the criticisms and why they're critical. Then we have a much broader and richer landscape in which to even imagine Baker's authorship.
When you were talking about the parallel between your experience of writing about her and her career, I think that one way to describe that parallel is that you are helping her, and you're doing this for yourself, and is sort of reclaiming the cultural and artistic labor of this very important, unique individual, and that in a way, new languages have to be invented to do that to this day.
I couldn't say it better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we need to get to our wrap-up moment of our takeaways. I just want to at least say out loud Sergio Mean's question. Yeah. And Sergio, you might have to reach out to Terry directly to get a response, so I at least want to put it out there. He's curious about whether in your research, did you ever come across any film footage of a performance that Josephine Baker did of Offenbach's operetta La Creole? He saw some of it once many years ago and has never seen it again, and he was wondering what the story was behind it. So you two, you got to work that out, communicate to one another off Zoom. But we have to get to our takeaway moments. To Chris, you want to go first, and then we'll let the lady have the last word. Oh, you got to unmute.
I can't see him.
Sorry, I said I'm going to pass on it and let Terry do that. She's the star.
Okay.
So
Should
do this.
Okay. From the diaphragm, Terry, just give us our takeaways.
Well, I would only reiterate that the book is really written as a witness to Josephine Baker's humanity and to her labor as a model for how we think about the work that actors do and that women do, that Black women do, kind of navigating all of the different limitations and inspirations and so forth. But that it's really about thinking about her through this context of the Black press, what they celebrated, what they criticized, the moments when they can't believe that there's actually a shade of stockings that's called the Josephine Baker shade. And then other moments when they're disappointed that she plays such a servile character when she's supposed to be the star. Like, that journey is really important. She doesn't have to be perfect. She doesn't have to be that sort of heroine. It's really the work that she put into it and her creativity that establishes her value.
Okay, so this is that lovely moment where everybody unmutes and gives a hearty applause to Terry Francis for her fabulousness and her generosity.
I received that.
And we also invite everybody to stay. We'll have a 15-minute after party with a toast for Terry to the book. And a huge thank you to Chris Horak and Michael Gillespie for a great session. So we will now go in. We ask if you come to the after party that you have your camera on so Terry can see you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I just wanted to be able to say hey to everybody. I see a lot of familiar names and faces.
So. So the after party is to celebrate, and I just want to start off. I don't have a wine glass, I only have my water bottle, but I'd like to invite everyone to join me in making a toast to Terry Francis on the publication of Josephine Baker's cinematic Prism. Some of us have our books here. And Terry, we want to thank you for this enormous contribution to film history and film culture. If you have the book, put it up. We want to thank you for a wonderful session, and brava, brava.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, thank you, thank you.
And invite other, particularly now, we've had 75 minutes of our esteemed scholars, Terry Francis,